the right to freedom, the right to health, and vaccine mandates. Who thought we could go back to General George Washington? Look at when this started. With that, we will have with us today Shaquille Latimer from Down Under, Mark Lee, and others. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. So that's the topic of the day. Before we're going to talk about vaccine mandates, quite a surprise there, maybe a bit of a stretch, but vaccine mandates beginning with George Washington and Shaquille Latimer. What do you think? You're a proud American, even though you're an Australian. You love this country. Don't you feel
I'm pretty.
inspired by? Don't you feel inspired? How could we question George Washington? I'm being a facetious moderator. Please, Shaquille.
Oh well, well. Firstly, I believe the Democrats like questioning the founding fathers, right? Didn't they? Didn't they say that this is a land of freedom, and then continue to have slaves? Those the founding fathers that you're asking me about whether I'd question? But yes, I don't. I do read a fair bit about American history. I don't actually remember. I don't remember George Washington saying that people should be forcibly injected with vaccines, but if that's the story we're going with, well, let's go with it.
Hey,
Well,
I'm just paraphrasing an article by Dave Leonard, which I thought brought up interesting points. But anyway, what are your thoughts, Mark Lee?
well, one, I was glad that you brought this up because I actually had a very interesting conversation early this morning. Was talking to a friend of mine that was going through some uh, dramas of their own life, for lack of a better term, and they were talking to some people in that Clubhouse app and in some other apps around the country, and they were talking to somebody from New York. And apparently, this young lady that they were talking to was a young lady I was talking to, but the two of them were talking because the New York lady was in the hospital system there in New York as a nurse, and she had recently fired apparently after she had been on leave for 2 weeks, and she was unceremoniously let go of because of exactly that. Apparently, she was one of those folks that is having some concerns about the vaccine because of things going on, whether it's the quickness of the approval or whether it's some concerns about maybe some of the ingredients or some of the other things that have gone on that people have stated are their concerns. And like you said, there are several places, including New York, that have already made that a policy. I believe it's going to happen here in North Carolina as well and other parts of this great country of ours. So we are already seeing the impact because people are already being let go, and they are now looking at, and this is where I'm going to bring in our illustrious head man and everything, Nick. They're thinking about doing suits. So they're thinking about suing them because, the mandates is a suggestion, as my friend put it. It is not necessarily law. So would they have a leg to stand on from a legal perspective if they fight the mandates by saying that, look, for whatever reasons, whether it was religious reasons, if they wanted a religious exemption, or whether it was just for personal choice, that they felt that they were unceremoniously dumped, and therefore they had a legal case? Because that's what my friend Stacy was asking in our early morning conversation, and I'm going like, I don't know, but I'm gonna be on the show later on with a lawyer, so let me ask him. You're on mute, Nick.
I should
Leave
be
him on mute.
I should be
Yeah,
on
for
mute
free.
for this one because
Yeah.
here's the problem. I'm a lawyer licensed in the state of Florida, and this may apply to laws outside of Florida. As you know, state law differs from state to state. Also have another problem is that the thing is I can't engage in an attorney-client relationship with people I don't know, with facts I don't know. Hence, I can only talk in generalities, similar to securities license people who can't talk about securities or voice my opinion relating to taking vaccines in general. So I can't really. It's weird. I can't really opine on a specific case if that's what's going on. But listen. Here's what I can do is opine on what the general law is from the Supreme Court of the United States that did exist all the way back in 1908, which Steve brought out, and that was the Jacobson versus Massachusetts case, where the Supreme Court did say that a state can mandate you to take a vaccine, and you don't have any recourse. At least the law will not give you any recourse. And this is the thing. This has existed for years, and it's been almost not controversial since smallpox and polio. And people of my generation, which by the way, we're almost 90% vaccinated. my generation, people that are 65 and older. Why? We remember smallpox and polio. We remember the measles, the mumps, the chickenpox, and all these diseases that would just scar you for life. We remember smallpox. Then you have this next generation who grew up very fortunate not to have a lot of these diseases because they were eradicated by my generation. And then we have these freedom nuts that are out there that because they live in isolation or they live in these rural areas and believe that their, quote, freedom is going to be infringed. Listen, your freedom, when it affects my life, ends at that doorstep. So you can take your snotty little rags and go elsewhere. So I'm totally, and unfortunately we have this political correctness. So rather than telling these people to basically get out, they go, well, let's try to educate them. Let's try to persuade them. Let's forget that stuff. You know, the thing is, what you do is you just say, look, it's just like what the airline industry is doing to their pilots and their stewardesses. You don't get vaccinated, don't drive the airplane. Goodbye.
So if I could just ask a question, and I'll try and be gentle with you, Nick, because I understand.
I'm really sensitive.
Well, no, but it's just I understand that as an academic,
all the way to the Supreme Court. Boy, that makes me really sensitive.
I understand that.
Lay it on. Come on.
I'm going to. I understand that as an academic, right? Normal logic will somehow pass you by, especially an academic who believes in the Democrats. So let me just make sure I understand it. One, you have a problem with political correctness, right? Two, you are saying that people today take for granted the luxury of not having had all of these terrible diseases because of vaccines. But yet, people today who take for granted the freedoms that they have today that were fought for, over the decades of the last century, those people who say, well, we really need to have government rule our lives, we really want socialism, those people are okay, right? That's all okay. This was a woke, don't forget, this was a woke virus. When it comes to protesting for your freedoms, you are a terrible, horrible person, and it is going to be a super spreader event. But if it's a Black Lives Matter protest, everybody is immune. Is that right? Am I understanding the logic correctly?
No.
That sort of rather seems like what you said.
No, counselor. It's typical what they call twisted logic. But let me read.
Well, I apologize, Nick. I've been hanging around with lawyers, and so I sort of am learning their techniques.
Okay, let me read to you something, since I sit on my homeowners association board, and we blow through about $1 million a year. Okay, in order to live harmoniously in a close community, it's necessary to have rules. Please keep in mind each one of these rules is necessary to make your day-to-day life and your neighbors more pleasant and enjoyable. Okay, and so the real problem is this, Shaquille. If you live like you do in the outback and with a bunch of kangaroos, I don't really give a rat's rear. You have all the freedom you want, hanging out with the kangaroos and Uluru and climbing Ayers Rock. Do what you want. You don't encounter people. But if you live in a townhouse community like I do, where people are next to each other and you're in a urban setting, okay, then, as they said, this is what you bought into. And I'm sorry, if you move into a city, this is what you bought into. If you live in Kansas, keep your freedoms. Enjoy your freedoms in the outback.
And other panelists seem to have such a problem with these rural Republicans not getting vaccinated. And the other thing that you say is, if my expression of my freedom somehow infringes on your freedoms, then I should be quite honest. I agree actually on that.
Oh, wow, then we're in agreement. Boy, this is
the law agrees with you on that as well. The foundation of all advanced democracies and liberal democracies agree with you as well on that point. Can you please explain to me how somebody who is unvaccinated is going to pose a risk to you? Because presumably your risk is that you will catch a disease that you are vaccinated against catching. Is am I understanding it?
That is absolutely correct.
Yeah,
there's studies that actually show that.
Really?
Your vaccine is not 100%. In other words, it's
not
100%.
No, but not being vaccinated is also not a 100% chance that you're going to pass on a disease that you don't have to somebody who's vaccinated against catching that very disease.
Oh, I mean, if you are vaccinated, can you transmit
if I'm not vaccinated
If you're not vaccinated,
and I don't
you can
have
transmit it.
the virus, I can't
Right.
transmit a virus that I don't
That
have
is correct also.
to somebody who is
Right.
vaccinated against taking against that vaccine,
Right.
that virus. Correct.
Right.
So the only way that your argument there would make sense on the law is that if I am in fact infected with the virus,
Right.
then my ability to interact with the community should be restricted because of the risk that I impose.
I would
Right?
agree. Yeah, I would agree.
Republicans agree with you on that as well. That's why
Right.
people who are positive, who test positive, are required to stay
Right.
at home, right, on quarantine. So what are you bitching about again?
Okay, it's the unvaccinated people, the people that live in your area, let's say with a bunch of kangaroos, that decide sua sponte to come in and fly an airplane with moi. Okay, at that point in time, you're infringing on my rights because the thing is,
But
you're not
those
vaccinated and
outback,
you didn't pass a test. Now, if you said, "Well, I'm unvaccinated, but I passed my COVID test," come on the airplane, Shaquille. I don't care. But if you're not vaccinated and you don't pass a test, you don't get to fly on the airplane.
Are you saying that you're
With your
actually
kangaroo.
saying not that the vaccine should be imposed on people, but the requirement to prove that you are not a carrier of the virus is
Correct.
what should be required?
That is another alternative.
So
As a matter
it's
of fact,
actually not the vaccine. So the vaccine mandate is not actually what you're supporting.
that's correct.
No,
It's not
okay.
the vaccine mandate. It's the overall situation. And this is
Okay.
when
So,
now,
so,
I realize
essentially,
Counselor-
so essentially, you're a Republican then.
well,
yes.
yeah, I was a member
Right,
of the
okay,
Republican
good.
Party.
I'm
now
glad we
part
got
of the
that
Democratic
established.
Party, and frankly, I don't give a
I'm
rat's
glad we got
about
that
any party.
established. Perfect.
I think
Perfect.
parties
So-
are stupid. I think it's
So Nick Palavida's views are
Independent,
that
baby.
he is a
Independent.
Democrat, and the reason he's a Democrat is because he supports all of the ideas that Republicans have.
No, I don't
Right.
support the Democratic Party too, and I've gone to the leaders of the Democratic Party and told them that. And you know what you do? You get this adverse reaction. I'm not even independent. I am me. I vote for me, stuff I believe in. And unfortunately, what happened? Our founding fathers got away from this. We created this two crazy party system rather than relying on your own thoughts and who you are. Now, and
That
it
would
still
be
exists
mayhem.
today.
If you didn't have two strong political parties, that would be mayhem. But I
Oh,
have
that's
another.
your opinion. Come
But I
on.
have
They
another
had that
question.
in Greece.
I have another
They-
question for you.
And even in,
And look how
and even in
dysfunctional those-
Italy, they didn't have
And look how
parties.
dysfunctional those political systems were. But
No,
Nick,
but
I have
They
another.
want to convince you of that, so you join a party. Give me a
I do
break.
have another question for you. Presumably, you're an intelligent person, and you must think
Extremely.
that you are because you have all those.
No, I have records actually.
and you have degrees and like lots of
No,
expensive.
I
bits
have
and
test
pieces, all that,
records.
and
You got like mental tests and things like
And
that.
you-
I got one right
you've
here.
just- You've
My
just
brother
stated
wanted me
that
to
you
go
went.
into Intertel,
You
and I'm
just
going, I got
stated that
some
you
money
actually
back
went
up.
to the leaders of the Democrats, and you couldn't get any sense out of them. Let me
No,
ask you,
I
what
just told
sense
them
were
I
you
had
expecting to get out of Joe Biden?
Oh, I didn't see Mr. Joe. And
Oh,
the
well,
thing
thank
is,
goodness
I
you
think
didn't.
Mr. Joe.
Thank
Joe's
goodness you
asleep.
didn't, because could you imagine trying to have a conversation with him? The actual
I think it would be kind of a waste of time.
Hey,
But
Nick, and
look, I've also talked to Richard Burr, who was the head of, who was a big
the-
senator here. I'll show you pictures and stuff like that relating various different issues. And he's a Republican, very impressed with him. Same with Tom Tillis here in North Carolina. Very impressed with these guys. They do know the walkings of Congress and the Senate. So don't dismiss the fact these people are not knowledgeable. Our senators are actually extremely knowledgeable for both parties. Here's where they fail. Their ability to work with people in general is incredibly low, and it just drives me nuts, Shaquille. In other words, the thing is on what I would deem to be relatively simple issues. So we have, unfortunately, in the Hill and you have to come with, hey, look, if you want to come with me sometime, there's a congressional meeting I used to go to every year in May in Washington, D.C. We get to meet with all the senators and congressmen. Okay. Mainly what we did is we handed them out money through a PAC because I was a member of a PAC.
I think I'm going to an
and-
SM club that month and being whipped and tortured with nails. I think that's what I've got on the month that we're going to Washington DC.
Oh, wait a minute.
Washington,
Wait a
DC,
minute. You got on your schedule to go to a tantric event? I didn't know this.
Well, thing is, see, look, okay, you're used to hanging out with a bunch of kangaroos in Australia and trying to figure out what the law is here in the United States by reading books. I'm used to going actually into Washington, D.C. and meeting the senators and congressmen and finding out what's going on with the law. There's a big difference there.
And as the president of the Pacific Rim Chamber of Commerce and the International Green Alliance, I wouldn't know very many politicians or the political processes or anything.
I'm talking. You're talking about people that are on the rim, baby. I'm talking about people in the center of the universe.
Just remind me. Is
United States of America.
Is Hawaii in the Pacific Rim? Is Los Angeles technically in the Pacific Rim? Oh, they are. Does that mean that America is actually in the Pacific Rim? Oh, it does.
Doesn't matter.
Oh,
They're
wow.
not the tower of power. Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Here we go.
You got to
That
get
tower
the
power.
tower of power is not L.A. I know all the theater heads believe everybody listens to people in L. The tower of power is in Washington D.C.
So
it's not Moscow and definitely not L.A.
I will
be with Washington.
I will make a comment, though, Nick, that you are correct. Senators and House of Reps people can often be quite intelligent and quite knowledgeable. The problem is not just them. The problem is that, first and foremost, the overwhelming majority of them are very knowledgeable about the law and very knowledgeable about the political process.
Many of them are attorneys, by the way.
Okay. Yeah. And oftentimes it's because they're lawyers.
Right.
But how much specialist knowledge do they have in specialty areas over which they govern? Unfortunately, oftentimes there's a failure there. The other failure is, and it's at the moment more pronounced in America, but there's ebbs and flows that will go to other countries. One of the issues is that the political parties of the United States are seeking to destroy each other in order to cement their power forever, instead of seeking to actually, take on each other's views and actually do things that are sensible, that are going to actually help the future of America. And that's where the problem is. The problem is a failure of the political system, not necessarily the failure of an individual politician, but the failure of the political system, and the fact that I think there are very few politicians that would have the gumption or the intestinal fortitude to stand up and say, we really need to make changes to this system. And that's
that's the problem. That's their problem. Okay. In other words, the system is what it is, but they don't
it's all about problems when they're able to legislate.
Stand up and tell people what is actually going on.
When they're able to legislate in order to
Steve, forget Morrisville. You should run for Congress. Because the thing is, that's where the Tower of Power is. I'm afraid it's not in L.A., which Shaquille thinks it is, or in Morrisville.
But real quickly, I'm sorry I left early. I want to just continue. But that's a good segue into what we're talking about, is this divide, Shaquille. We're seeing, on the infrastructure deal with, the $3.5 trillion, Senator Manchin calling it fiscally irresponsible. We're going to be shut down. The government might be shut down by midnight unless they raise the debt ceiling. Democrats are supporting that. We're divided on that issue. And of course, vaccines, masks, this whole topic of a vaccine mandate. I mean, some people, I threw that out there because I still think it's important, but we get in this fine line of that becoming a political issue. So every issue is being divided, and there's a line,
Nick,
this debt ceiling is garbage.
Isn't there a bigger problem, which is one that I've talked about on this show, and which I really get frustrated about and everything, which is that, unfortunately, and Shaquille will love knowing this, there are so many of our electorate, and you were talking about that one man, one vote kind of concept, but there are so many of our electorate that are swayed and influenced, for lack of a better term, by the special interests. I can't tell you how many times you go to a poll and you see, the different PACs, whether it's PACs that are race-based or whether it's PACs that are nature-based, like the Sierra Club or whatever else, and they are giving you this sheet.
The Sierra Club's not
people that they have vetted, or they claim to have vetted, and that they are the ones that they want you to vote for. And unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I think that the vast majority of people, for whatever reasons, are slightly lazy, and they therefore vote according to what that sheet tells them to vote. And therefore, they haven't even vetted the people themselves. And that becomes a problem in and of itself with this divide, because there are quite a few people that, they will look, and I'll just use Durham as an example, and they will look at what the People's Alliance told them to vote, or what a group that is associated with the African American community told them to vote. They'll go in there and they'll literally check those people. And I'm sure that if I asked them, why did they vote for those people, they would probably either give me a BS answer, or they'd tell me to go F off, to use Shaquille's terms and everything.
Yeah, well,
I've never used those terms. I've never
You know.
used those terms on air. Thank you very much.
But see, that's the practical aspects of how Washington, D.C. works, Mark, which is unfortunate but true, because think about from their standpoint, they have to deal with all these issues all over the country, all over the world. So they have to rely on their advisors and the PACs, which
Right.
I was a member of the 12th largest PAC in the United States. You get access to these people because you're writing big checks. And
But from a fundamental,
it doesn't matter, you're writing checks.
but
you
from
know.
a fundamental perspective, though, whether the electorate or the voting constituency is well informed or not isn't really the issue. The issue is about whether or not those in power, those that have actually in the party that's formed government, are willing to allow the normal check and balance in the system, which is the other party. So if you are a Republican and you're in power, like there are in many states in America, it is really important that you spend the time to find out what your opposition says, because your opposition will give you information about a part of your electorate that you may not have understood. And generally speaking, in liberal democracies, in a two-party preferred system, which is pretty much everywhere, there are some unusual things. Like in New Zealand, it's a little bit harder to understand if you're not familiar with the system, as I was saying last night. And there are a couple of other countries that are like that. But as a general rule, we have a two-party preferred system. And the reason why that's such an important system, the reason why when you see these third parties starting up that say we want to be a centre party, we shouldn't need a centre party. What we need to have is our political parties actually respecting the views of the other political party, because they represent a part of the electorate that may otherwise be forgotten about. Centre-left parties tend to focus more on social issues and less on the economy. I'm oversimplifying, obviously. And centre-right parties tend to focus on economic and business friendliness rather than on social policies. And so they can act as a check and balance. And together, the idea is that by challenging each other's ideas, they can come up with policies that are actually going to be the best interests of the nation overall. Instead, what we see in your country is Republicans and Democrats tearing each other apart. And I maybe I'm wrong about this, but in my perspective, it's Democrats generally, it's the hard left of the Democrats Party that are framing things in such a way that anybody who doesn't agree with their solution to a particular problem, therefore is somebody who supports the problem and is therefore an enemy. Now, this is not unique. Republicans did this once before as well, or many times before.
And they still do. They got rid of
Maybe
Liz
they still
Cheney.
do. Maybe they still do. But the idea that a person who has a different opinion to you or a different proposed solution to you is somehow an enemy is something that is very, very unhelpful. And we've got to stop doing it ourselves as people. And we must insist that our politicians all over the world stop doing that to our government and our government processes.
Shaquille,
Well, look
it's
what
not-
the
Shaquille
Republicans
and
did to
Nick,
Liz
hold on
Cheney.
just one second. It's not just a problem in politics. It's also a problem, as we saw here in North Carolina with UNC, and now apparently we're seeing it in Yale with the academic institutions, because sometimes donors are very influential, and there's a program that is apparently very prestigious in Yale, the Brady Johnson program, and a lady made some comments that were not seen all that favorable by the Republican powers and some of the donors that were very high up in that administration. So they basically forced her out for some things that she said that they may not have agreed with, because definitely those donors include Nicholas E. Brady, who you know is a former U.S. Treasury Secretary under Reagan, and also George H.W. Bush, and Charles B. Johnson, who is a mutual fund billionaire and a leading Republican donor. So apparently this lady said some things about Mr. Trump being a demagogue and other things, and they decided that they wanted to force her out. We saw something similar with some of the
No,
other things.
And they were Democrats, right?
I don't
Right,
think
Mark?
that
They were
in any
Democrats. Oh, no, they
conceivable
were
way-
Republicans. Sorry, they
Mark,
were Republicans.
Mark, I don't think that in any conceivable way that relates to what's happening, or to what my comments were about how politics should run, how government should run. Private people acting in a poor way is not the equivalent of the government acting in a poor way, because the government has the ability to legislate. Donors don't. If this woman who is clearly anti-Republican, anti-Trump, who wants to go on her rants and raves about how horrible he is and how racist he is, does so at a university that is funded by Republicans, what was she expecting was going to happen? If she wants to make those sorts of one-sided, partisan political comments, then she should go somewhere which is funded by Democrat donors, and there's no shortage of those. So that in no way whatsoever, no conceivable way, did that relate.
Her argument was that they failed to stand up for academic freedom amid inappropriate efforts to influence the curriculum. So I think she's feeling that some of those people are trying to influence the curriculum, and that she has academic freedom that they apparently, or at least she felt, they did not stand up for.
Yeah, the academic freedom to say what was it that she said? So you left that part out. You left out the divisiveness of her comments, the things that she's trying to teach, the absolute unfettered partisan attacks upon Republicans and Donald Trump. That's what you left out. And I'm not standing up for Donald Trump. I'm just making the point that if you are going to attack Donald Trump in a place where Republican donors are donating their funds, what are you expecting? Like, this is just so silly. And again, this is what we're seeing over and over and over, is people saying, well, we are going to silence people who don't agree with us, or they say, I'm going to be confrontational. I'm going to go to people who I know don't agree with my opinion. And then when there's a negative consequence to me, I'm going to say, well, my freedom was imposed on. My freedom has been encroached on. My freedom of speech is gone. Look at how much they've bullied me. They've harassed me. They're racist. I'm oppressed. Okay? It's so pathetic and juvenile, this sort of behavior. So she brought that upon herself. Tell the other half of the story, Mark.
I hear you, and I will get to the other half of the story. Apparently, she made some comments, and I'll just go ahead and read what she says, because they were saying that this program, and I'll even say the woman's name, Beverly Cage, a historian of 20th century politics who has led the program since 2017, has resigned, saying the university failed to stand up for academic freedom amid inappropriate efforts by its donors to influence its curriculum and faculty hiring. The donors both, and I went through the donors earlier and everything, so I don't have to repeat that. But days after the 2020 presidential election, Professor Gage said an opinion article in the New York Times by another instructor in the program calling Donald J. Trump a demagogue who threatened the Constitution prompted complaints from Mr. Brady. So apparently she was actually trying to defend another colleague of hers, and everything is what I'm hearing, is that she was trying to defend a colleague of hers to say whatever he wanted to in the media and all of that. So since taking over the program, to kind of come back to your point, Professor Gage has expanded.
You sidestepped. You completely sidestepped.
I did not sidestep, like the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong and the civil rights movement in the United States. Until late last year, she said she had received no criticism from the donors or the administration about the course's direction. So I think that it was after this colleague of hers made certain comments about the past president that's when the donors came down hard on her and everything along those lines. So and apparently she's still staying a 10-year.
So again, you sidestepped my point altogether. The comments were partisan comments made about Donald Trump. Now, people fall into either they absolutely hate him and detest him, he's the worst human being that ever lived, he's just like Hitler and all those sorts of nonsense claims, or people sort of talk about him like he's some sort of messiah, instead of people just looking at policies and working out what they are. So she has made a partisan point at a university with strong Republican donors. She's made points about Donald Trump that wouldn't have been unique points. They were just the normal points. He's a racist. He's a sexist. He hates women. All the usual Democrat talking points. And now she's surprised. This educated person is surprised that Republican donors have had a reaction to this.
Yeah, that's basically what happened. And it happened. Mark, if you would just hold off a minute, because this guy's trying to push you over to, well, it's a private industry. It happened in Congress, my friend. Kevin McCarthy and Liz Cheney.
Wait,
of course, I know you're in Australia. In Australia, you didn't get the news that the Republicans ousted Liz Cheney.
Don't bring up Australia. Make up your mind. I made a very banal comment about the function of government and the fact that Republicans and Democrats should respect each other's policies. As a response to that banal comment was Mark Lee's, as usual, race-based comparison, which had absolutely no bearing whatsoever on the comment that I made, bringing up, well, that's exactly what happens in other parts of our community, such as universities. This poor woman has, I'm taking some license here and paraphrasing, this poor woman was essentially bullied out of her job by Republican donors. Okay?
Right.
Now, And I
First of all-
said
first
that
of
in
all-
no way relates. Now, what you want to do now, Nick, is say that I'm pushing this down to private industry. Let's go back to Congress. Make up your mind. If you haven't won on this particular part of the argument, then just give it up and say, yeah, you're right, Shaquille, and then move on to the next one. But don't sit there and tell me that that this is an example that negates my point that the political parties should show some respect to each other, because that is to show respect for the Americans that actually voted
We
for
do
them.
have to show. There needs to be more respect. I have to sign off, guys, but real quickly, as you continue your conversation, I'll be back tomorrow at 11, and just be patient. A couple more weeks, I'll be back for the full hour for good. Real quickly, government shutdown midnight.
Tonight?
Yeah, but we don't know. We'll see what happens. We were talking about the whole Trump accuser thing, and lots of stuff going around the world. We really haven't talked much about Afghanistan, other stuff going on in the world, but democracies continue to disrupt. And here's my final take. I think Shaquille Latimer has brought up a good point. We are more divided today in the United States than I think we were divided during the Civil War, divided along racial lines, ideological lines. This is the party politics of identity, where we're not encouraged to talk with each other. Lobbyists are spending a lot of money to sway things out of bills or in bills. It just $14 billion spent in federal elections just last year. In 2001, that number was $1 billion. I think it's a mixture of money, social media, things being said that's encouraging no one to talk together. You know, a few years ago, I was in Washington. Many years ago, I met with Senator Manchin briefly. And he told me that it's so lonely there. He actually lives on a boat in Washington. And, it's an environment where you don't have a lot of, I think they call it the freedom of the mountaineer. And he missed Charleston and he missed Fairmont because, that's where was his community. And there's such a lack of sense of community. And we're seeing this even in the North Carolina General Assembly, where the divides are so big, they're no longer working together to govern, to solve problems. So that's my last take, my last job. There's a difference between campaigning and governing. Governing means bringing people together to make solutions that make sense for everyone. And it's simply not happening. Whether we can fix it, I don't know. But at least we can bring it up and demand more from our leaders. I'll be back tomorrow for another edition of Pod TV World Edition. And on PBS Carolina last week, Jessica Holmes referred to me as Congressman Rao, and then she had to correct herself. So maybe
it's in your future.
Yeah, it's
I'll
in the
take that
future.
money.
There's no doubt about that.
Oh, thank
Hey,
you.
She was looking into the future, Congressman Rao.
I'll be back
Congressman Rao,
tomorrow.
I like
Thank
the
you so
sound
much.
of it.
I like the sound of that too.
Appreciate
We
it.
need to move you to Congressman Rao. Upgrade.
All right.
I like
Thank
that
you guys
sound.
so
It
much.
sounds very wonderful. Appreciate
Shaquille
you,
Latimer,
Steve.
thanks for bringing up great points. We really appreciate you, my friend. And I'm back tomorrow.
Sounds
We'll
good.
see you tomorrow, Steve.
Look
All right.
forward to seeing you
From
tomorrow.
PBS, I guess.
Happy campaigning, Steve.
Right. Is that
Yeah.
Friday?
Hey, Nick and Shaquille, just really quickly, I guess the point that I was trying to make, and it did not come across that way, is that just like we are seeing this divide going on the political front, it is happening in other institutions as well. Because it does sound like this woman, who, by the way, was a European American, not a African American woman, and everything, had been trying to put out diverse views. She had been trying to put. You said I was making a race issue, so I was just saying that this
Diverse views at Yale University. Good
right.
luck.
Well, apparently she was bringing in everybody from like the former defense secretary, James N. Mathis, to the conservative intellectual Yavel Levin, to the civil rights lawyer Vanetta Gupta, and the racial justice activist.
Who are we talking about
So
now?
it does sound like
We're
she was
talking about
trying to-
Yale
Good luck.
University.
Yeah. So
No,
Jessica
no,
was
which
trying to
how
bring some
elite
diversity
they really are.
into the voices of Yale.
Which woman are we
The
talking
question
about?
I've got, and that's where I was getting ready to turn it back to a
Which
discussion,
woman are we
is
talking
how
about?
much do academic institutions give their people leeway, or should they even give them that leeway, or should they be controlling it like we're saying that some of the parties are doing as well? That was the parallel I was trying to make, is that do we need to give the academics some leeway to create the curriculum, or are we going to like have it being dictated up by the donors or by whatever the administration?
Mark, what was the name of the
Which
lady?
woman
that
are we
screwed?
talking about? What's her name?
Give me the name of the lady so that we know who she is. So we
I
can give her
mentioned it
some
earlier.
love.
It's Beverly Gage. Beverly Gage.
Deborah Lee Gage.
Beverly.
Beverly Gage.
Yes.
Is she unemployed now?
Yeah, maybe she could come and work for us.
I figure maybe she should get on the IBM TV network. We should bring her on. You know, I always love to hear about the elitist Northeastern schools coming from the South.
Right.
Okay, the elitist Northeastern and Western schools and how they dominate using the media, the conversation of what Southerners think and what Westerners think. It's like working with Shaquille. He's going to tell me what I think when I'm here. I know what I think. Okay, so the thing is, and when I'm saying this, you know, the University of Alabama, which has a good football team and actually a good academic team, a school. Wall Street Journal ranked them 400 to 500. They didn't even put them in the top 400 schools in the country. So who's number one always? It's the elite Northeastern schools, Yale, Harvard, all this. Hey, look, if they were that good, these people would have solved they would solve the COVID-19 problem. But they're not that good. I mean, the people that come from the elitist schools are just frankly aren't that bloody good. What they are good is keeping power and maintaining power in their schools and their universities and their foundations and their money. So when you see something like that from Yale, which doesn't surprise me, you know, it's just, again, their mania of control of their elitist world that they live in. Now, next year, who's going to be the top 10 schools? It's not like football and basketball things change. It's going to be the same old people voted by ETS supported by ETS in Princeton, New Jersey. I don't know if you know this, but Princeton's always number one. And they base it on the SAT scores and the SAT, which is developed out of Princeton, New Jersey. I mean, it's a very academia is very incestuous. I must give credit to Northeastern. We moved up in the top 50, but it was, but of course, Northeastern's up in the Northeast. The Southern schools are looked down upon, and they did this in the Wall Street Journal by slamming the University of Alabama. Go look at their rankings, 400 to 500. Give me a bloody break that they would do that. And I hate Alabama. Don't get me wrong. I come from Florida. We hate Alabama. But still, it just shows the elitism that exists by the Northeast and the Wall Street Journal. So we can do this.
I see we've got Sasha in, and I'm glad.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, Sasha's objective. He comes from Canada and Russia, so he gives what goes on here.
I've got some Canadian news for him, and I want to know if he's heard about it and his thoughts. But apparently, in Canada, Indigenous children, so that would be children native to the country, and native. We call them Native Americans, so they'd be Native Canadians there and everything. But a federal court in Canada recently as 2 days ago, paved the way for billions in compensation to First Nation children who suffered discrimination in the welfare system after a judge dismissed a legal challenge by the government. So 2 years ago, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruled that the federal government had willfully and recklessly, and that's their words, discriminated against Indigenous children living on reserves by failing to properly fund children and family services. The tribunal ruled that the federal government was required to pay compensation worth a whole lot of money, and they did it in one of those European amounts that I'm not good at converting. I'm just going to be honest about my own math.
I think Canadians use dollars. I'm not sure anybody European amounts.
But instead of paying out the compensation, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, said the government would appeal the ruling to make sure we're getting compensation right. So on Wednesday, however, a federal judge wrote that the tribunal's compensation ruling was not unreasonable. And so what they said was no one can seriously doubt that First Nation people are among the most disadvantaged and marginalized members of Canadian society, according to Justice Paul Favell. And the tribunal was aware of this and reasonably attempted to remedy the discrimination while being attentive to the very different positions of the parties. So it looks like they are having some issues around race even in Canada. And it also looks like one of Sasha's favorite people, Mr. Trudeau, has gotten in the middle of it and lost the case. So I was wondering if you heard anything about this, because apparently Trudeau is the one that put out the challenge. And I know you're not his biggest fan.
Well, Trudeau is Trudeau. What can you say about that? I'm not fan of him and his decisions and the way he looks, the way he talks, the way he walks. Anything about Trudeau, I despise, and I hope he will call another election in a few months and will finally lose it. Because as he said, that he will keep calling elections until he will get majority. So if that's the case, if that's what he's about to do, then there is whatever comes first, his majority or his defeat. And I hope the defeat is the right answer. That's
Well,
why.
that strategy didn't work out very well for Theresa May, so I'm not sure why he wants to deploy the same strategy.
So why all this hate, Sasha, from Trudeau? I don't spend much time with what goes on in Canada
Because he's a clown, Nick.
here.
Because he's an absolute clown and a moron. He's incompetent. He puts the
I hear all the ad hominem arguments.
at risk.
What did he do or not do? Please, not who he is.
He's an unsuccessful school teacher. That's all what he is. And in fact, how you can trust the government to a person? First of all, he's lying a lot. But I'm not saying that all school teachers are lying, but I'm talking about unsuccessful school teachers like Trudeau himself. And he's inconsistent in his policies. And frankly, lately, he starts getting on nerves of a lot of people, just the way he looks and the way he talks. People are getting sort of tired of him. So I hope he will call election in next.
Could you be a little bit more specific?
Well, let me be.
Okay, since you probably follow Canadian.
No. Let me be a little bit more specific about it.
Specific.
His really only claim to anything of substance is he's the son of a woman who's a complete tart, but who unfortunately for Canadian history was married to one of Canada's great political leaders in Pierre Trudeau, his father, and that's about as far as his credibility goes. He, has gone to debates and like public forums where he was asked by returned service people who have fought for Canada and for Canadian freedoms overseas in places like Afghanistan to please explain why their healthcare is not being funded by the Canadian government, but the terrorists that they were fighting against are being funded. And he gave some swami, crappy kind of answer to it. The problem with Justin Trudeau is that he has gone so far down this woke crap that he doesn't care whether or not it helps the everyday Canadian. He doesn't care, or he appears to everyday Canadians not to care about whether or not his policies are actually improving the lives of everyday Canadians. And that is causing there to be a lot of dislike for him. It's also things like him going into Parliament and refusing to answer questions. He was asked by the opposition under Andrew Scheer, for example, whether or not he had met with the integrity and commissioner, and he was asked over and over and over and just completely refused to answer the question, or in some cases has had his offsider answer the question and refused to be answerable to the Parliament. That is an abuse of the sovereignty of the Canadian Parliament.
No, that doesn't surprise me.
He has won the election. There's a whole big list of things that I can say. He has won the election. Where I think that he does do a good job is he does focus on things like the environment. He does pay, despite what Sasha just said and Mark just said, he does pay a lot more attention to Indigenous issues and First Nations issues. Canada does a much better job of that than Australia does. So there are some positive things about him, but there is a smugness about him that I think is off-putting to a big part of the electorate in Canada.
Okay, well, you answered my question. It sounds to me he dodges questions and he lies, so he's a lot like Trump. Dodging dodges questions, doesn't disclose his tax returns, and just lies outright, like saying, "Oh, Mexico's going to pay for the wall," and they never did. So, hence, Trump was out. So it sounds. I think
there's a difference between a political statement and something that could be an ethics violation. Okay.
Really?
There's big differences about it. There's big differences when you, as the Prime Minister of Canada, want to call out people like me for somehow being racist against black people, while you allow photographs of yourself to surface where you're in blackface. I mean, come on. I don't have a problem that he was in blackface, by the way. I personally don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with him doing is calling out others for being racist. Okay, because we're all going to say things and do things that somebody else could be offended by, and it's not a reflection of who we are as a person. For him to do that is much like your beloved Cuomo and all of his Cuomo-sexual followers.
I thought Cuomo's out.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a lot like him, who, basically says, well, this was just a political hit job. But when it was the other way around, he had absolutely no problem demanding the resignations of Republicans on the most scarce of evidence, on just, some unsubstantiated allegation.
Yeah.
We
should politics.
We should demand that our politicians stop it because it's pathetic, it's wrong.
It's very
and our countries have much more serious issues to deal with. I obviously have a very, very, a heartfelt spot for Canada because my mother's life was saved by the Canadian Hospital, by the Vancouver General Hospital and their amazing staff. And I don't think that anybody in Canada should be asked to donate money to the Children's Hospital because they don't have enough equipment in a country as wealthy as Canada. Australia does exactly the same thing. That, to me, is bad governance by government. The government is supposed to provide these resources, and if the government is wasting money on something else, especially something in a foreign nation, whilst allowing there to be inappropriate healthcare issues or services in Canada, then the government is out of line for doing it, whether it be a Republican or a Democrat, whether it be the Liberals or the Conservatives or whatever, whoever is in charge. This is not acceptable. And I personally think that rather than talking about these woke talking points to do with race, maybe what they should focus on is education, hard infrastructure, not human infrastructure, that lie, but hard infrastructure, education, healthcare, etc. The kinds of things that are actually going to improve the lives of the people that live in your country.
Shaquille, wait a minute. Every time that I've heard Reverend Barber speak and some of our other major civil rights leaders, that's all they brought up in their conversations, whether it was the Moral Monday marches or whether it was a number of other things. Yes, race was not included, but they talked about education. They talked about all those other things that you just mentioned, and they talked about them as being things that needed to be addressed immediately. Not like some way down in the distant future and everything, but they talked about them as things that they needed to be addressed immediately. So to think that these leaders, and myself included, are just thinking of it on a racial standpoint is a disservice, because I remember the Moral Monday protests, and I remember hearing many of the speeches, and every
Moral Mondays is specifically about the rights of black people. Give me a break, Mark. Come on.
They're not only about first of all, it was a wide umbrella of people that talked. It was a wide umbrella of people that talked. It wasn't just African Americans that talked. It was African Americans. It was Hispanic Americans. It was people from all kinds of groups, including one of your favorite groups, people from rural North Carolina. So they were like four white folks that were speaking as well during the Moral Monday protest. So I'm just using that as an example. So don't think that it's only being just race-based. I mean, if you want to say Black Lives Matter, maybe that was race-based, but the protests that I was part of, whether it was Occupy or Moral Mondays, were very much of a more umbrella type organization, and they did address the issues that you have brought up several times. So I'm just saying that some of these leaders that you're talking about are doing that.
Let me just respond, because you like to sort of go on with all these examples of how your experience of this particular group therefore negates the point. It doesn't. Okay. Look, I understand you've got to focus on, or as I've said before, a chip on your shoulder about black issues. Fine. If you think that those are really important issues, that's fine. You have absolutely every right to be focused on them. It's not a problem. But don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. Don't try and persuade me that Moral Mondays was somehow some non-partisan group. They are not a non-partisan group. They are a political left-wing group that are talking about things like racial justice, abortion, things like that, putting CRT into schools. Now, if that's something that you support, no problems. No problems. You've got the freedom to support those ideas. That's not a problem. But don't pee on my leg and try to tell me that a political activist is somehow a political leader in government. And so look at how they were really trying to focus on education. They're not trying to focus on education just in broad, non-partisan ways. They're focusing on it only insofar as it fits in with what they want, which is a very left-wing and woke idea. So come on, mate. Let's be honest.
First of all, I would disagree with you on that and everything.
You can disagree with all you like, but that's what Moral Mondays was about.
Like I said, I would. It's like
if I say, if
I say to you, the Democrats.
It was a while back, Nick. It was like a few years back. It was when people literally went doing the Republican administration. Nick said he didn't hear about it, so I'm getting ready to give him some lessons.
I never heard
it was several years
back.
If
I say to you, Mark, that the Democrats were the party of slavery, the Dixiecrats were the party of slavery, and you say, well, I disagree. Okay, you can disagree all you like, but the facts are just the facts. Okay. Republicans were founded in part in order to end slavery. That's just the facts. Now, you can try and come up with some bizarre logic about how they all switch sides. You can do whatever you want to do, but the fact still remains what the facts are. And the facts are that Moral Mondays was a partisan woke group. That's what that was all about.
First off, I was
Never
going to
heard
tell
of it.
Nick what Moral Monday was, and it was a while back. It was a few years back and everything. But the other thing is that I would never have said, and I have never said, that the Republicans were not involved in the ending of slavery and the history parts of slavery as well. So I definitely know that. There's even conversations around that when you talk about Juneteenth and some other things going on in the African American community. So I would have never said that. So for you to say that I said that, that's you putting words in my mouth once again.
No,
So,
I was using an example. I was very specific. I didn't say that you did say it. I said it would be the same as if you said the following. So I'm not saying
okay,
that you
well,
So
all right,
why
well,
was
then,
Moral
in
Monday
that case, Moral Monday
discontinued?
was
Are
a
we
few
not
years
interested
back.
in
It
Moral
was
Monday?
when the Republican administration was in office in terms of the governor and everything. It was a coalition of concerned parties that under the leadership of Reverend Barber, the leadership of Reverend Gatewood, the leadership of several other people, I'm just thinking of their names off the top of my head and everything. And yes, they did go and intentionally, because it was a form of civil disobedience, get arrested in our state
Yes, I would do
legislature.
that.
And
That
so
makes
it was, and there was people that were of a variety of groups. There was people there that were associated with the unions, and in terms of the labor unions, yes, there were African American groups. Yes, there were educational groups. And that's what I meant when I said it was an umbrella group of various organizations that were not pleased with the state government of the time, and they had issues with the legislator. So they did go there and organize these protests, and some of those cases are still in the courts on some level or another, but most of them have been settled one way or another. But that's what
Yeah, but when you say it was an umbrella group, it was an umbrella group of people on the hard left that were unhappy with your Republican mayor and your Republican Senate, et cetera, et cetera.
So what you're saying is the hard left.
The non-partisan issues that he was so concerned about was, oh my God, they're going to lower taxes, which are disproportionately going to help the rich. Oh my God, they're going to restrict abortion. Oh my God, they're not going to provide, wokeness in our school curriculum. These are some of the
those are very interesting.
It was also about pay.
wasn't
It was
partisan.
also about pay, because like I said, my labor friends were more concerned about the fight for 15, which is trying to get everybody at $15 an hour and everything. Some of my education friends wanted higher pay for the teachers and everything. So I'm not going to agree with you that it was just a hard left issue. Were there some people in there that were leftists? Yes, but there were also some moderates as well.
If you don't agree with me,
that I would consider more moderate than I would consider hard left.
If you don't agree with it was a partisan group, that's fine. I accept that. Please tell me, of the 924 people that were arrested, I've looked it up now, of the 924 people that were arrested and subsequently prosecuted, can you please tell me how many of them were Christian conservatives?
Actually, there were.
Would zero be the number?
No,
oh, that's right, zero.
There were
None.
some
That was
Christian
a partisan
conservatives.
group.
Some people would argue that Reverend Barber can be labeled as a Christian conservative, depending on your definitions.
Yeah,
but I'm just saying, with some people,
do
the
people walk around with a
somebody
banner
who's
that I'm a
insane is not
Christian
something that's
conservative?
relevant. Okay, you're going to tell me that Reverend Barber he's somehow some religious conservative. Okay, he's a conservative, but then again, conservatives are against gay marriage, they're against abortion, they're against this, they're against that. So, but but this guy, he's a conservative. I might as well just say, look, I'm a Democrat. There hasn't been any Fijian grandmasters, therefore I just declare I'm a grandmaster, and you all must believe that I'm the best chess player.
You know, there was one
It's
person
so
in Las
ridiculous.
Vegas who actually did that, by the way. And
I just declared himself world champion. Maybe that's what
yes,
I
he
should do.
did. Actually did. And Sasha probably knows who he is.
Sasha, if I
his
just
name
make
on the
this
thing.
declaration, I am the best chess player that ever lived. Would you be
can
shaking?
go ahead and do that.
next
Go
time
to
we play
Fiji
chess
and do
against
you
me?
have every right to do that. It's called.
Yeah, I might have the right to do it.
You're right.
I might have the right to do it, and Sasha has the right to swear at me in Russian and laugh his head off because it's not true.
Sasha has the right to call you out, just like you have the right to call me out or anybody else out. But I'm just saying that is the case. I did want to just bring up when this is a much lighter topic and everything, but I am also concerned sometimes when our young people and our this may shock Nick, but our journalists are in fear's way. So I did want to just mention everything, but there's apparently a photographer in the area of the Taliban that is a young photographer, and apparently he is facing execution because apparently his family is concerned that he has been sentenced to death, and they're very much concerned about his future and everything. But this is a young journalist that is in that area, Mortasi Samadi, 21 years old, a freelance journalist who was one of several journalists who was arrested at street protests. Speaking of street protests, at the beginning of September, all were quickly released except Murtasi, whose whereabouts is not known. So there is some fear that he has not been found and that he may be, facing the execution or other things from the Taliban. So our prayers and thoughts do go out to him, and hopefully his family will find him and find him in a healthy situation and not as they are fearing, because we know from history that sometimes journalists from other countries don't always do well when they are doing their job of trying to report the news and things along those lines. So like I said, they did say that his family is concerned for his safety after he was detained while covering the women's protest in Herat. And like I said, apparently there has still been no sign of him, even though others have been released.
We're on the hour, so we're not going to have time to respond to you, Mark. We're on the hour. The opinions of me are not the opinions of Australia, by the way. So if my nation doesn't agree with me and IBM TV doesn't agree with me, that's okay with me, because apparently I'm free to express whatever view I have. Our thoughts do go with those journalists, and I hope that the current administration decides to have some heart and some sense of obligation to the people that have helped America and its allies in Afghanistan. I won't say any more about that tonight, but Biden
you won't have to, because the U.S. government is folding tonight.
Biden might say that he's turned the page. I haven't turned the page, and I hope that nobody else turns the page until this situation is resolved.
Well, looks like we're at the hour too, so we'll have to say goodbye till tomorrow. And we'll see if the government's open tomorrow. That'll be very interesting.
Yeah.
See where my stocks are.
Hope not.
Right, we're closed. Goodbye. We're off the air. Government's not paying us anymore. Goodbye.
Bye.